Thanks everyone for being here today. We are excited to cover this topic. We're going to be talking today about future-proofing outsource partner portfolio, and we will start with 3 trends that drive outsource partner strategy. Some of you have probably spoken with us about this topic before. This is a refresh of a study from a couple of years ago, and we've done quite a bit of primary research, surveying individual conversations, interviews with the buy side to understand how partner strategies are being designed, the factors, the priorities, and we're going to highlight 3 different trends that we see as really shaping the market right now, or shaping buyer behavior. And hopefully this is helpful for all of you that are either sourcing or selecting or managing vendors. That's the audience this is designed for. At Risk Group, we think of ourselves as the expert in services. And this kind of brings together the market with the buy side. So excited to cover this. We'll start out with that, and then we'll talk about some of the actionable insights going forward. And we'll leave a little time at the end for Q&A. So with that, I want to jump into a poll. I want to just hear from all of you on, you can just pick one. What is the factor that's most likely to shape your outsourced partner portfolio strategy over the next 12 to 18 months? There's a lot going on right now. So which of these, I'll read them off as we're letting people click. Accelerating Gen AI integration into your services, managing geopolitical, regulatory, and compliance risks, the perma crisis, as we like to call it, expanding access to niche providers or scarce talent pools, addressing delivery costs and budget pressures, simplifying governance across a complex supplier base, and enhancing agility through more modular and more flexible partnerships. So maybe switching around the way that you structure your partnerships so that you can have more agility. I see the questions being answered quickly, which is great. They're moving back and forth. Khushbu, I'm going to ask you, what do you think is going to be #1 here? You did interview.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gen AI is, going to win this race, AB. Definitely, that's what we've been hearing a lot with the clients as well. The conversations around AI are becoming very real, and there is a lot of excitement around it. And of course, that also influences the supply mix strategy as well. So I'm actually very curious to know what's going to be the result.
Well, we can share the results. You're right, and as analysts, we can't put our thumb on the scale, but that's a good bet, right? The AI is changing everything. It's changing the way everyone works. So accelerating Gen AI integration into services, 45% of you said that. I'm going to be the it depends and say, I actually think that had we made this a multi-choice question, we purposely made you pick one, right? And AI is probably the biggest. But the challenge right now is that had we made this multi-choice, probably most of you would have picked like 2 or 3 of these, right? Because we still care about cost. We know that there's more risk. We know we need new talent to tackle AI. We know we need more flexible partnerships. So it's like kind of a yes and type question, right? So with that, let me just give a quick overview of what we see as the most, and thank you everyone for humoring us with the poll. We'll include the results of that in the slides that we send out, so you can see how everyone voted. But let's touch on these top 3 trends that we see that you saw when you were going through all the data on this survey. The first one is that in this world, I mentioned permacrisis. What we know is that we don't even know what we don't know right now, right? There's uncertainty. There's been, even in the last weeks, all kinds of new challenges that pop up, new unexpected news headlines, political changes, geopolitical changes globally as well as in the US, that we have to be ready to that we have to be ready to manage. We have to be ready to react to that risk and hopefully get ahead of that risk and have as agile as a portfolio as possible. So that's one, optimizing, not necessarily overhauling, but looking at the tweaks. We'll talk about what optimizing, not overhauling, looks like in a second. Cost is important. The goals are innovation and performance consistency, because cost savings alone just don't matter in services if the delivery quality is poor. So you've got to have good, you've got to optimize for costs, but then the outcomes need to be more innovation, more performance, better performance. And then the third one is that quality concerns, resistance to change, data gaps. There's a lot of barriers that are slowing progress in changing our portfolios or evolving our portfolios or evolving relationships with providers. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the third trend here. All right, so with that, I am going to turn it over to Khushbu, who's going to talk about this first trend about permacrisis and optimizing, not overhauling.
Thanks a lot, Amy. So in 2025, what we are seeing essentially, and the kind we're operating in right now, is what's often called a permacrisis environment. That means constant shocks, geopolitical tensions, economic swings, regulatory shifts, cyber threats, all hitting us at the same time. In this environment, organizations are not making wholesale changes to their supply portfolios. What we see instead is a focus on fine tuning and rebalancing. They are looking at where to consolidate, where to diversify, and where to adjust scope, all with the goal of improving efficiency and resilience without adding any unnecessary disruption. Less about massive resets and more about supply mix, making them more resilient, making them flexible, making sure they are able to absorb uncertainty by design. So with that, let's look at what uncertainty really looks like in practice. So when we talk about absorbing uncertainty, this slide really brings it to life, right? We have a snapshot over here of different that we are dealing with right now. Talking about geopolitical instability, everything from India-Pak tensions to the Russia-Ukraine war to the Middle East conflict, trade barriers and tariffs that we saw very recently, and how that had a ripple effect across global supplier contracts, um, government sanctions, controls, bans on semiconductors to China or sanctions on Russia. These are, they can suddenly disrupt contracts and delivery. Regulatory volatility, cybersecurity and IP risks, cloud restrictions, new security standards like zero trust, and of course, currency volatility. So now what does all this mean for outsourcing? It means delivery disruption, it means cost instability, it means sudden vendor exits and increased compliance overheads. So the bottom line is that we cannot always plan for stability anymore, right? So we have to design for instability, and that starts with how we shape our supplier portfolio mix. So against that backdrop, what we see, and we very recently, like Amy mentioned a few minutes ago, where we very recently conducted a survey where we wanted to where we asked many questions to the buyer organizations, and one thing that we wanted to know, of course, was the current satisfaction that they have with their current portfolio. And what we saw is that the reaction is mixed. Some basics are in place, but there are definitely gaps that show up in risk spread and delivery levels. So if we look at the results over here, many organizations do see a gap between what their providers are delivering and what the business actually needs. A lot of companies do feel that they have the right number of providers for their IT services and business process services. But when it comes to risk being appropriately distributed, or whether providers are really performing at the level of business needs, satisfaction essentially drops quite sharply. So if we look at the middle row in particular, only a small proportion is what we see are satisfied with how risk is distributed across their providers. Moderate, share say that their providers are truly serving their evolving business needs. So this satisfaction is what we have been hearing in conversations, what is pushing organizations to make active changes in their portfolios. And that leads us to the heart of this trend, right? Like, how are organizations actually responding? So let's look at the strategies that companies are using to adapt their portfolios and what's really driving those changes, right? So in this particular slide, when organizations are generally dissatisfied with their current supply mix, they don't all take the same path. There are mainly three strategies. The largest group that we see, so again we asked the question in the survey, that what is your current primary strategy for supplier portfolio management? And the largest group, which is about 42%, what they are doing is portfolio rebalancing. So that means keeping their providers the same, but redistributing the work. So, for example, if you have two providers that are carrying, let's say, 70% of the workload amongst, like, let's say, five or six providers, they might spread it more evenly across those, a larger chunk of providers to manage risk and improve performance. The second group, about 23%, are going for consolidation. Of course, this is about, rationalization down to fewer, stronger providers. Classic, strategic sourcing logic says that, putting more spend with fewer partners, that will get us better rates and simplify governance, right? And yes, that of course does hold true, but the nuance today is making sure consolidation does not create new risks. So, for
Yeah.
example, yeah, if your two remaining providers, if they are both operating, for example, in the same geography, you have actually, increased your location concentration risk. So what we see in conversations is that buyer organizations are, very cognizant of this as well. So they are taking their decisions accordingly. Similarly, around 12% are choosing diversification. That means, adding new providers to bring in niche skills, digital capabilities, or, Gen AI expertise. Sometimes that also increases costs in the short term, but it also creates, competitive tension and, reduces dependency on a single source. And then, of course, what we see is 23% who are sticking with the status quo, no changes for now. So, when we ask our clients why they are making these changes, right? The top three reasons essentially that come over and over are, efficiency improvements. They want smoother, leaner operations. Like I talked about in the in the previous slide, there we do see some unsatisfactory provider performance as well. So, providers need to keep up. And of course, cost takeout, the evergreen driver, though now they are also being paired with innovation and reliability goals. So you see, there is a theme over here in a world where shocks are constant. organizations are pulling different levers: consolidation, redistribution, and diversification, to make sure that they are optimizing their supplier mix for resilience and performance. So now that we have unpacked trend one, let's shift to the second big force, which is shaping outsourcing in 2025. How cost remains the entry point, but innovation and performance consistency are what really matter.
Yeah,
So,
and I think just to
yeah,
comment, sorry, Khushbu, I
yeah,
just want to comment on the last trend because I think that last slide, we see the data kind of move all over on this year to year.
yeah,
It's not a huge swing, but there are little shifts in the market. And I think back to like when there was a talent shortage coming out of COVID, 2022, 23, diversification was a really big push then, even though to what you said, sourcing tends to want fewer suppliers in all situations, right? There's a lot of good reasons, but it was hard to get the talent and skills that we need. So there was a push to bring in specialist suppliers that had that. There have been other times where, maybe consolidation and cost savings are the focus. I think the rebalancing is an interesting one because it kind of says we've got to move things around with what we have. You mentioned location risk, and that's a good point, right? We might want to keep our same suppliers, but we might want to add another location with those suppliers. Maybe we're all in India in one city and we want to add a second city in the south instead of the north, where there's been some geopolitical, the far north has had some geopolitical tensions, or we want to put in a nearshore center, or we want to shift voice work to the Philippines, things like that. There's a lot of different levers that can be pulled within the same service provider set. And when we talk about permacrisis, as we used the word earlier, it's really about optionality, right? It's about having the options to make changes as you need to, and that's where that agility comes in. So I think this data, although sometimes the data seems like the same, it's helpful to see it, you know, time after time, and the
yeah,
changes, the little changes tend to follow other trends. So on that, we
yep,
can jump to the next one. I
absolutely.
know you
And
have more to
of
say.
course, all
Go ahead.
the levels that we see over here in it, that they would also depend really on the industry that we are operating in, and what's the strategy that we are essentially taking, we are planning to take, right? And what really matters to the sourcing leaders in that very moment. So very rightfully pointed out that the data will always essentially move around. Yes. So going to the next trend, what like we have always mentioned, and all outsourcing decisions, they really always start with one question, right? It's about how much can we save. And even today, cost is still the entry point. That's what we see. That's what we hear in every conversation. Every supply conversation begins with efficiency and savings. But here's what's different in today's time, right? So cost alone is no longer enough. What truly determines supplier staying power is whether a partner can bring innovation and deliver that with consistency. So what the data tells us over here is, again, we ask the question around what is the top priority for for supplier portfolio management. And 89% of the organizations say cost efficiency and savings will all remain their top priority. So yes, cost still dominates the conversation, but let's look at the next two, right? And this is where I want to essentially focus. Nearly 6 in 10 organizations now rank innovation and partnerships as a top driver of portfolio strategy as well. And 37% highlight service quality and performance consistency. In other words, it's no longer just about what you pay, but whether also your providers can keep delivering reliably quarter after quarter. What other two points also stand out over here around geographic risk mitigation? Again, 37% showing how much attention is going into balancing delivery footprints. Interestingly, 26% are actively limiting spend concentration with their biggest suppliers. That's a pretty striking change, right, from the old playbook of bigger is always better. So the big picture over here is cost is the ticket to play, but the real differentiators now are innovation, reliability, and resilience. And nowhere, is this shift more visible than in the explosion of Gen AI. And if we just look at this chart over here, Gen AI has shot to the number one spot for IT spend priorities in 2025. So last year it was ranked third. Today it's jumped ahead of cybersecurity, cloud, and automation. And I believe this sits well with this particular audience as well because of the results we saw in the quick poll. um, Over half of the organizations are actively looking for suppliers who can integrate Gen AI into their solutions. And nearly 47% are planning to upskill their talent specifically for AI. What this tells us is clear, right? It's suppliers who don't or who can't demonstrate meaningful AI capabilities risk being left behind in the supplier mix portfolio. And this isn't just theory. Organizations are already embedding AI into multiple business functions, is what we see, right? And let's take a look at some of these use cases also in action, right? And maybe before that, I'll also want to talk about certain expectations that we have from providers in the AI era. So the old expectation was around efficiency. The new expectation is growth. Buyers used to focus on applications. Now they want platforms that can scale and that can evolve. Commercial used to be all about time and materials. Now it's about value. Can you help me grow? Can you share the risk? Can Are you flexible in your approach? On the talent side, we used to obsess over about shoring strategies. Now it's about talent density. Do I get access to the best skills when and where I need them? And for the partners, it's no longer about being one channel in the mix, right? It's about being an orchestrator across the ecosystem. So buyers are saying, help me differentiate, help me run my operations better, and help me achieve my OKRs, and help me get the right cross-functional talent. That's a much higher bar than efficiency alone, and it's reshaping what organizations expect from every provider in their portfolio. And how organizations are essentially doing this. Some of the use cases that we see across functions, right? This slide will essentially give you a sense of how broad AI adoption has become. In IT services, it's around automating code generation, debugging, ticket resolution, building self-healing systems. In customer service, it's around powering self-service chat, voice bots, summarizing calls, fine-tuning responses for agents. Sales and marketing, again, generating targeted campaigns, creative content. In procurement, it's about writing RFPs, comparing vendors, automating invoice checks. So, the key takeaway is Gen AI isn't limited to just one department. It's becoming a horizontal capability that cuts across the enterprise, right? Um, and what's interesting to also see over here is how, organizations are actually holding providers accountable for, these higher expectations, not just around Gen AI capabilities, but, in general, this is where, best practices around performance management, come in, right? Organizations are raising the bar on delivery, and one of the key tools they are using is continuous performance tracking through scorecards. But the nuance over here is that even the best organizations don't treat scorecards as a punishment tool, right? They use them to drive collaboration and improvement, of course. So some of the best practices that we see are, framing the scorecard as a tool for transparency and mutual growth, and right, and setting that tone very early on with the service provider on the expectations that they have with them. Also, co-creating metrics wherever it's appropriate, especially with strategic suppliers, inviting them into discussion about what success looks like, communicating how feedback will be used, be explicit about whether it drives recognition, corrective actions, or both, providing visibility, sharing results very openly with suppliers to build trust, and celebrating high performers as well, right? Making recognition public, whether it's through QBR awards or preferred vendor programs. So this approach essentially turns performance management from a compliance exercise into a more of a trust building mechanism. And this shift is absolutely critical in 2025. Now let's zoom out and connect this back to resilience, right? Because while innovation and reliability are rising in importance, what we are also seeing sourcing leaders do is actively diversify their delivery portfolio to reduce over dependence on any one single geography, right? And how they are essentially doing that is through different strategies, making sure that the delivery and corporate teams are across multiple centers, even if it's in the same country. And for critical projects, organizations can leverage an alternative shore, for example, nearshore Europe, Latin America as a backup for single geography, projects specific BCP guidelines. So having very strong BCP guidelines that should be implemented over and above corporate level guidelines, knowledge management, agile working model, dedicated risk practice. All of these strategies, are essentially complementing post-COVID-19 gains as well, just to make sure that what buyer organizations are really focusing on is supplier visibility and making sure that risk is being mapped across new geographies and backup providers as well. So with that in mind, we actually have something for you, which is the complimentary offer for today, which is the supplier risk assessment questionnaire around business continuity plan and geopolitical resistance. If you wish to request, please click on the link in the chat.
Thanks. Yeah, I think this great opportunity here, great points, Kushbu, but this risk assessment, this is really kind of a checklist to think about your risks as you're, considering your BCPs, as you're considering the portfolio. So wanted to offer this as just something complimentary. We're also happy to have a conversation about this, and a lot of the work we do with our clients and our members is helping them at a very granular level within certain process areas. For instance, within, I'm going to blank on one, within app dev, right? Application development or specific industries, banking or financial services or insurance processes, helping them to think about their strategy and risk factors. And I do see some questions in. I'm going to hold those so that we can go through just a couple more slides because we might answer some of those as we go. But also wanted to point out, feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A as we're going, and we'll make sure we have time for those in the end. All right, shall we talk about trend 3?
Yep, of course. And with that in mind, we, trend 3 essentially focuses on the challenges, right? Quality concerns, change resistance, and data gaps, and how they are essentially slowing portfolio progress. Over to you, Amy.
Thanks. Yeah. So this is it's not new that we have challenges. That's always the case, right? Everybody has their the hurdles we have to jump, but things are happening fast, and not all organizations, most organizations are still struggling to keep up in all industries. So let's talk about some of the things that people run into that we see commonly, and that our clients told us when they are trying to build a more effective supplier portfolio. One of them in services specifically is that supplier shifts can impact service quality drastically, right? So it's very easy to feel like because you are using a certain service provider, you're kind of locked in. It's going to have it's going to have disruption to your customers. It could have disruption to your internal stakeholders. And it's considered pretty high risk to change, right? Now there are processes, there are strategies to do a pretty smooth transition. We have worked with a lot of organizations on transition planning, and often it's just really being conscientious about it, but often that's viewed as a barrier to any kind of shift at all, and you just stay with the incumbent, even if it's maybe a B level work instead of A level. You're willing to accept B minus because switching to someone else could bring you lower instead of better. Internal resistance to change and the perception of that disruption, even when there's visibility into improvements, it can still be a lot of inertia to change. Contracts, and this is one that I see come up a lot. So because in sourcing, we think of a contract as something that you're locked in on, most people don't think, when I tell them, you can be negotiating your rates, or you should be changing your terms or revisiting your SLAs if performance isn't where you want it to be. In fact, we sometimes call that the watermelon effect, right? Your SLAs, your KPIs are all green, but the service is red. If you ask any of your internal stakeholders, they're unhappy with the supplier. And sourcing's like, well, we're in a 3-year contract. What can we do? The reality is you can do a lot. As a buyer, you can shift things around, you can shift work around, you can shift SLAs. The supplier's role, service provider's role in these relationships, these long-term contracts, is to keep you happy so you renew, so they get more business. We have a whole session on this from an industry analyst coming up in our conference, right? Their role is not just to, your relationship should not just be how do we meet levels in this existing contract for the next 3 years or 5 years or 7 years with no change. It should be, how do we evolve this relationship? And in some cases, shift things around with the supplier. Maybe we need a different team. Maybe we need some different sites. Maybe we need to, here's our challenges. How do we open that up at an executive level? So contractual obligations often feels like a barrier, but there are many ways I'm not suggesting breaking a contract or doing anything unethical, but certainly within fair contracting, there's a lot more flexibility typically, especially if you put the right clauses in upfront in terms of revisiting things and benchmarking. Data and analytics gaps, which is often that, we just don't have visibility into the data we need. We don't have great performance data. Maybe it's very subjective and not objective. And often we're relying on guesswork and perceptions, and that feeling that things aren't going well, or the feeling that we might have risks, but we haven't really validated that with data. And then, of course, there's always a lot of other challenges around cyber and dual running, the cost of running dual suppliers and things like that. So this is kind of in order of priority, the ranking of how often these come up, but they're all real and they are all kind of interrelated. Let's talk about for a minute the possible strategies. I mentioned some of the things that I view as an opportunity here. Some of the other tactics we see, right? When we see service quality, often a lot of what companies do, what some of your peers do, is they run controlled pilots with new suppliers. They start building out dual delivery models before they transfer, before they transition. There's often, a lot of benefits to bringing on a champion challenger or even a third challenger and giving them very specific work that's appropriate as you test them out. Often dual delivery isn't as much more costly as you would think it is. And also trying, honing in on the right suppliers for the right type of work. I often see this as a challenge. We've put everything with this one big supplier, or we put everything with this one, really high-end supplier, right? There are different types of work that different providers are appropriate for, and you should think about that strategically and shift it around. So that first most popular, I think we said 42%, is just shifting work around. Often that's rebalancing because you're like, my AI partner is going to be this specialist that has really good AI talent. I'm not going to pay that specialist to do the old run, process work that almost anyone can do. I'm going to shift that to somebody that's more economical at that. Or in some cases, that old process work needs an AI infusion. How do we move that somewhere else? So there's a lot of different ways this can go. It depends on the company and the strategy and how much work is outsourced or offshored. But thinking that way as the holistic view is really important to get the best quality. Resistance to change. I think the best one here is this last point, linking your strategic outcomes to the goals of the portfolio. If you go and tell someone in the business, you tell your CFO, look, we're going to change providers because that's better for costs. Even a CFO is probably like, that's a lot of work, right? Why? How much costs, right? You're going to get doubt. You're going to get questions from the start. I think if you start with, look, here's our target as a firm, we want to get to this. As a company, an enterprise, we want to drive to this goal. We think that the way to get there is to slowly move down this path by changing our portfolio or changing the providers or adding someone new. It's going to be a little bit of a transition, but this is the end goal. We're all working together on that end goal. You're going to have a much better conversation, right? You can involve people early, make those trade-offs. Like, yeah, we want to get to that transition, but let's not do it during our busy season. Or, hey, we're also doing this other systems change, so we need to stagger these, right? Really understand how you get to the end goal together. I mentioned contractual lock-ins in a lot of detail in the last slide, but I think that there's two things there. One, knowing building your contracts up front so that they're more flexible. There's maybe modularity built in. There's optionality in terms of benchmarking and looking at how we can reevaluate things. In some cases, it might make sense for them to be shorter. Things move a lot faster. But I talk to people that are going into 6-year contracts, and it's not necessarily a bad choice to go into a 6-year contract, but you're not going to, you should not be locking in terms right now, 6 years from now, that have no flexibility for you to revisit. That's not good for you or your service providers. The service providers, when I talk to them now, they are still trying to kind of figure out and adapt pricing to agentic, right? How are we going to charge for agents versus people in a contact center, right? There's a lot of things being tried and there's a lot of work being done to answer that question. But we all know logically that the answer is going to change. It should change if we're operating flexibly as the technology in our environment changes. So let's give ourselves flexibility so that we can change things around so that neither party gets locked in. That's how you build a win-win contract right now, and a win-win transformation and relationship is all about flexibility to learn and improve it together. The data and analytics, a lot of building in scorecarding, building in dashboards, better data from the start, helps to drive that and get around that challenge. And then, the risks that we talked about, some of the other things, really thinking about your business continuity plan and cost benefit modeling and how you look at those transitions. All right. We're going to get to actionable insights next. And we've kind of hit on 3 trends. Khushbu covered 2. I covered one of them. And I want to just summarize that before we jump into some Q&A. From a organizational perspective, it's all about resiliency right now. It's all about agility, options, being able to shift your business as things change. And those things might be negative occurrences, they might be positive occurrences, right? Technology and risk are the risk factors are the 2 biggest things that are happening right now. Are the 2 biggest drivers, I would say, that are driving what's happening in our ecosystem. So giving yourself the flexibility is so important. You really can't plan for a stable environment around you. Cost, is a baseline, but success really hinges on how innovative you can be with your partners, how reliable your partners are for you, how reliable you are for them. This is a 2-way street, and how well you are aligned strategically. Service quality, very, very valid concern. Think about how you phase out your transitions. Think about dual models. Think about running things in parallel as you try them out. There's a lot of pilots with AI going on. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I know there's some headlines about, 95% fail. That's actually, I would doubt that when you look at what they consider success, right? And the timeline of that study. But if you think about, you've got to try a lot of things to find where the success is. Think about how you try things in a way that doesn't compromise service quality, right? And getting stakeholder buy-in up front as well to enable that change. Measurement, transparency, optimization, help with optimization. And then finally, think about delivery consistency, right? So performance scorecards, feedback loops, how do you bring visibility to delivery so that you can really continue to get fast feedbacks and adjust on the fly. So if you think about, what we saw in our data last year was that 75% of pilots didn't go to production for AI. That's actually okay if you can invest very little in those pilots and make a quick decision of go, no go. Hey, this wasn't the right path. 25% succeeded. We're going to move quickly on those, right? So that's just an example. I think we'll see those numbers shift very significantly because the tech is week to week, the tech is getting better, right? But think about that in all of your relationships as well. How do we get good visibility so we can make fast decisions and move things around as the world changes around us? All right, I want to jump in here, and I referenced this a little bit earlier, that we have Engage Dallas coming up. This is our biggest event that we have. We have about 200 plus practitioners in sourcing, vendor management, global business services, IT, tech, other tech roles, functional leaders coming to Dallas, coming up very soon, September 8th. And sorry, I said 250. It's going to be 450. I'm not even paying attention. But more than 40 Everest Group analysts. That might have even grown. Very few sell side. This is not a trade show where you get a big hall. This is a meeting of the minds where we will talk about the biggest challenges that are happening right now and how we take our organizations through them. So I want to encourage everyone to come to Dallas. If you haven't looked yet, click the link, or we will provide a link. There's a link here in the slides as well to get to our website and see the Engage Dallas agenda, register for it. I am very excited. I'm running from this to a dry run of the keynote, and the keynote I'm very excited about. We've got excellent hosts. We'll be talking about how, there's a lot happening with tech. We'll talk about AI and tech. There's a lot happening about risk. We'll talk about that. But what this is really about is what we need to do as leaders in that transition, right? It's not a tech conference, it's a leadership conference. So the connected advantage, innovating for enduring growth, how we help our organizations get through some of the things that we've mentioned today. So please go to the Everest Group site, look up our events, and if you're interested, you can always send a message to us on LinkedIn or reply in the chat here or in the Q&A anywhere as well. So I'm going to jump now to Q&A, and I want to encourage people to jump in on here, and I'm going to kind of let's see. I saw one earlier. Khushbu, there was one on Gen AI and AI governance, best practice on integrating service provider. I know you typed that. If you can just speak to that for a second too, so because I bet a lot of people have questions about AI governance as providers.
Of course. Essentially, what I meant was, as Gen AI ramps up, governance has to essentially, travel with the work, right? The easiest way, in my opinion, to do that would be, with providers, is to make their governance an extension of yours and not essentially a separate system. So, just having clarity on, for example, a shared dashboard, same view on both sides, on quality, safety flags, incidents, quick reviews every month, emergency huddles, if those are needed. So, so basically agree on the metrics that you both will live on and have, in terms of the things that we could track is around, quality, safety and privacy, operational metrics as well. Yeah, sorry, were you saying something, Amy?
No, I was just agreeing. Keep going.
Yeah. And, just have a joint AI governance charter, mapping your AI policy to the provider's controls, defining what's in scope, what's prohibited, having a shared sort of a, risk taxonomy and tiering. I think all of these aspects would really help drive that.
Yeah, thank you. I know that you had typed an answer, but not everyone can see it. So I want to make sure we cover that. I see a question here about, many businesses nowadays are wanting to set up their own global capability centers. We see those as, we call those GCCs or global in-house centers. Typically, a center in India that's doing a lot of, moving a lot of the work and doing it in-house. The question is, how significant is that going to be for outsourced partner strategies? Thank you. I'm glad you asked, because that is a really great point. We do see a big influx in GCCs. I will point out that we also see a big influx in service provider setup or assisted GCCs, or build, operate, transfer, which means that there's a role for an external partner in even setting up that capability center, and then it might go back in-house. So right there's a role that sourcing needs to play that they haven't in the past. I feel strongly that we all need to be thinking about this, about our partner, our service delivery portfolio as internal and external. This is no longer a handoff where you have a GBS organization that handles, external or internal centers, and then you have a sourcing organization that handles external partners. It's all the same thing. It's workforce strategy, it's AI strategy, it's business strategy, it's functional strategy. If you're not harmonized at least at a senior level, then you're missing out. When I talked about the connected advantage as a theme, that is a really good point. There's convergence across internal, external, and the best companies are thinking about that holistically. Just to give a really transactional example, one of the banks that we work with is building a GCC. They're it's a provider-assisted GCC. They have several outsource partners. When I talk to their vendor management team, they are like, how, we expect that GCC will be managed from a performance standpoint the same way we manage our vendors, meaning that everybody providing services to a function has a scorecard they need to meet. They have KPIs and SLAs and operating outcomes that they're being measured to. And the same level of visibility and cost modeling and everything. So I think that it's not a or, it's an and we need to be in, and there's a lot of benefits to having the ability to shift work internally and externally, even within the same, within the same function, sometimes within the same project or delivery stream, right? So let me pause there. I know there's a bunch of other questions on here, and I'm gonna that you just typed while I was speaking, so I'm gonna pause and read these. Can you speak to how organizations are navigating hiring bots, AI, non-humans for work? Has there been any success, and how does this change the approach to outsource due diligence? I think, yes, there has been success. I have seen, I've seen some pretty cool demos. Even yesterday, I was at the contact center AI, or what we would think of as a contact center provider, showing off their AI. It went way broader than what we think of traditionally as the contact center space or customer experience space. And some of those are in production already with various other, with various clients. There has been success. I think that the cost model for that is still working. I think that a lot of the agentic implementations are still in test. And I think you really need to get with the providers and dig behind the scenes to understand data, how they're running. If you're looking within procurement, right? What's the data set? What part of this? Often understand that this is a series of bots and not just one. You don't want to put too many eggs in one agent basket because agents really do a task. You're usually looking at a series of tasks and a series of data. And I think that that definitely changes your approach for outsource use and due diligence. I think there's also decision points on whether these are bots we build ourselves in-house or implement in-house, or whether they're implemented with your outsource provider, right? Whether they're partner run, and there's a lot of combination strategies on that. So you need to make some decisions up front. If you want true systems of execution, how much of that you own versus buy, right? Or rent, I would say, and what the trade-off is between, build versus rent versus buy, what the contract terms are long term. So this is really rewriting the contracts in ways that we haven't seen. Yeah, there's another question here about pricing for agents versus manpower and whether I've seen successful models. Big question for 5 minutes, no slides. I will say that we have full-on sessions that engage where our pricing analysts are going to talk about that, and we'll be doing more webinars. We are building out a model for pricing and agentic.
Yeah.
Some of the talk right now is, is it still a kind of per transaction still works with agents? They're not going to be free. It costs a lot to build them. So there is going to be some cost in there. I think we'd all love to see it be agentic to be free. But I think in a lot of cases, cost per transaction may be adjusted cost per transactions, but I think that's going to really vary quite a bit. And I probably can't do it justice with the quick back of the envelope answer there. Stay tuned for some models, and I'm not sure that I don't know who was asking that the way I'm viewing it, but would certainly continue to tune in. We're happy to have a briefing on what we're seeing specifically with the pricing agents that are building the model on that, or pricing analysts that are building that model. What other questions can we fit in a minute? I do see a question on the Keep Call Centers in America Act. we do have a response and to that. I would say, right now, that I can send a response to you, Nicole, and I know not everyone can see the questions because they come in and they don't show up unless we answer them in type, I think. There is a act and committee in the US government around call centers. If you're not familiar with that, shoot us an email after. We can kind of send our perspective. There are, I just want to caveat that that there's a lot of different things happening in that bill. If anyone's how a bill becomes a law, there's many steps, right? They end up looking like something different. What's prudent now is to understand that, come up with, what your strategies are. But we are having conversations with our clients about that, but not necessarily seeing reaction to it yet, because that's very early in the process right now. So hopefully that's not meant to be a non-answer, just a yes, companies are starting to look at it. It's only been out there for 2 weeks, so they're not taking action. Right now we're in watch and learn and start thinking phase of that bill. All right. I see one other here, and that's not really a question. It's more of like 3 reasons that these things fail, and outsourcing falters. Appreciate your points on that. And I think there's some good points here, right? Procurement objectives often don't align with business objectives. Totally agree. Second one is that, well, people want innovation. They often aren't great at estimating the extent of behavioral change needed. Co-create rather than dictate. 100%. Often what I see is that, we get together with operational people and talk operationally, and no one ever really strategically thinks big picture, or companies are really prescriptive. They don't share enough information. They keep the service provider at arm's length. Innovation doesn't happen in those environments. You've got to create the right context. And then the last one, most cited, insufficient investment in internal capabilities, or low procurement maturity. Agree with that too. These relationships are a two-way street. So can't have top level innovation and strong relationships without the buyer giving their due share as well.
Absolutely.
Kushbu,
And
go ahead.
yeah, I mean, these are very interesting points, right, Amy? And I was, essentially reading through that, and I know we are right on time, but just one quick thing before we close this off. It's very important to have the right mindset, right? Because to Amy's point, we can't buy innovation like SKU, right? So it's important to co-create with open data, with joint KPIs. Again, no arm's length delivery, and in terms of change management and integration engineering, right? Like we need to essentially fund them as real work streams. I think if we are able to work on these aspects, and use our classic levers around consolidating and rebalancing and diversifying, we would it would essentially really help us in the long run.
All right. Well, with that, we will wrap up. The slides will be sent out and use the recording usually within a day or two once the recording is wrapped up. Appreciate everyone attending today. I also appreciate the questions. I know it's a lot of questions and hard to get to in the last 3 or 4 minutes there, but there's also some links in here of other references that might be helpful to people. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us, schedule time with our analysts if you have something you want to have a question about. And one more reminder to register for our Everest Group Engage, and I hope to see some people in Dallas soon.